Hi and welcome back to the next video. This is video 28 and this time we are dealing with displaying all block entries by a specific user with pagination, and we do this by parent-child communication. So we refactor our existing component where we display all the block entries and add some input-output binding to it. So we handle the view in the child component here, and the navigation or pagination we handle in the parent components. Our video structure is as always: first we have a look at the video outcome, then we write a user story or read the user story for this, and then we implement it and close it. Let's have a quick look at the outcome of this video. Here we are in all our block entries, so in our home component, and we use our block entries component to display them all here. We can navigate to it like before, we can paginate through them like before, and now we can also go to our users page, for example, and then we get displayed all the block entries of a user, and we can also paginate through them, visit one block entry here, so there's no image uploaded, and so on, and do all this stuff. And now we have done this in our code with our all block entries component, and here we have like an input where we get the block entries from the parent component, and we have an output where we publish a pagination event to our parent component, and then the pagination itself is handled in the parent component, because one time on our homepage we paginate through all block entries from all the users that are having block entries, and on a user's page we are just not paginating through all the block entries by this specific user. So the pagination is handled in the parent component and the view is handled in the child component. Let's have a short look at our story first. Here we are in video 28, and the title is display all block entries of a user and his profile and do some refactoring. So the story is, as a user I want to be able to view all block entries of a user and his profile, so I can directly see what he published. So at the moment we are only displaying all block entries of all users on the home page, and we have a user profile page, but there we are just displaying some info about the user, so his name or his age. And now we also want to display all our block entries that are published from this specific user on his profile page. So the acceptance criteria are, now we want to add some decorators with input and output for our block entry component. So it should have an input for block entries and an output for paginating, because we have to do this paginating in the parent component, because on the home page we want to paginate through all block entries, and in our profile component of a user we just want to paginate through all the block entries by this specific user. So we do the paginating in the parent component and the displaying in the child component, so in the block entries component. So as you see here, we have a child component for user profile component and home component. So the block entry component is the child component for user profile component and for the home component, where we work with input and output, and we want to do also some refactoring. So let's move this to doing and start. So at first we can have a short look at Angular input-output. So input and output allows to share some data between parent context and child directives or components. And so we can look here, for example, for an input or for an example. So we have our detail component, so the child component, and we can say here we have an input decorator and an item string. So the parent is here, app component, then we have here our our child component. So here our child component, and this here says we give some data into it. So this is the item, and this item here is specified here in the child component, and then we give this the value current item, and then this should display it. So we set it here in our TypeScript file, current item to television, to a string, and then we give it into here, and then we can just display it like here in our child component. And the same works here. You can see it here directly. So this means we make an input, so we bind this to value, and the same or the opposite goes for output. Then we emit something from our child to our parent component, so value. So we make this also here in our child component. We say we have output, and this is an event emitter, so we emit an event to our parent component. So the event could be that something happened, and so something happened, then we emit a new value to our parent component. So you see it here in our child component. We've decorated at output our event, and this is from type event, or this is a new event emitter, and where we emit something, and then we just call when something happens here, and we emit a new value to our parent component. And this could be here also in our child component. On click, we activate, we fire this function here, add new item here with a value, and then we push this as an output to our parent component. And you see it here in the parent. We have here our child component, and this here now with normal brackets is an output event, and then we execute our function add item, this here in our parent component, with the value from our child component. So our child component pushes some value to our parent component, and then we do something here with it. So let's see here you have the input and here the output. So we have here our parent component is the app component HTML, and here we have our child component app input output, so the directive from this, and then we have here our input where we give a value into this component, and here we receive a value from this component, so input and output. So let's do some stuff here. So as you remember, we are now on our branch develop. So you see it here, we are on origin develop, and now as always we want to start a new feature branch, so we can say git-flow feature start and then the name of our new branch. So this is V-28. So we will now start a new feature branch based on develop, how you see it here, and now we can start developing, and we can, for example, just go into our backend. So we're here in API, and so we can npm run start dev and start our backend, and we can do the same for our front end here. So we're here in our front end folder, so that we can always see here what's happening. And now when this is started, you see our backend is working. We have mapped all our endpoints, and our front end is also compiling. And then we can do some stuff here. And you remember, we want to display in our user profile here. We are at the moment just displaying username, role, so some basic stuff, but we also want to display all the blog entries. So for this, we need to do some refactoring of everything we have. And we can, for example, start in our blog entry, all blog entries component. And there we need to add some input and output. So as we just saw in the Angular documentation, we need an input, and this is the value we get from our parent component. So this would be the blog entries, and then this is from the type blog entries pageable. So the same that we have here. And we also have an output. And this is if we paginate, then we want to emit an event. So we can say this is from type event emitter, and this is from page event. So we want to publish a page event to our parent component later. And here we can say it's event emitter from type page event. So we have to import. What's wrong here? So this is from protractor, but this is wrong. We want to import from Angular. So then we have a paginate event that we publish to our parent component. Let's say it like this. And then we can delete this here. At the moment we are binding it all to our data source here. We have here our data source and here, but we don't need this anymore because now we are getting our block entries here from our parent component. So we can just delete this. And we also don't need an onInit method function. So if you say it here implements onInit, then this runs first if you go or visit the component. So we don't need to do this anymore. So we can delete it. This onPaginate change we will still need, because here we will publish our event or as an output to our parent component. So here we could just say this.paginate, and then we want to emit an event to our parent component. And here we can just say we want to give this event to the top. So we can delete this here. And you have to remember, like we say here, our Angular pagination is working with first page as 0, but our backend is working for first page as 1. So we will say event.pageindex is event.pageindex plus 1, and this we can delete. So then this looks here very clean, the component. And we can also remove this from the constructor, because this is all happening in our parent component now. And then we are not binding to the data source anymore, but we can go directly against our block entries. Let's see, how did we name it? Block entries. And this is not anymore async, but this is also there when we visit the component, the value, so there is no async value needed. So then we can implement this here in our home component. For this we can just go into our home component. We have here our all block entries. And now we can just see, and we want to make an input for block entries. And we want to have an output for, let's say, can we call it paginate or event? We called it, or we named it paginate, so we can bind to this. So let's say paginate, and then we have to do something. For example, we can say we want then on paginate change, and this is a function that we have to specify. And here we can just say we want to execute, or we want to pass in our event. Let's say, where is it? $event. Yes. So then we need our on paginate change. And here we get an event. This is the page event that we also have here. The page event where we have like the page index, the length, the page size, and the previous page index. And so now we have to bind this block entries here to a value. And this could be, for example, we say we have here an async value. This is our block entries, so we make it an observable. And this is just a convention to end the dollar for an observable here, so that you directly see, okay, everything that ends with a dollar is an observable. So this type is observable. And then we have our block entries pageable. And then we say here we go against our block service. So we need this in our constructor. And then we say block service dot index all, and then like before we want to have our first page with 10 items. And then we can just add this block entries or bind them here. And for this we can use the async pipe. This will automatically subscribe to this value here, so the observable here gets hot, and will also unsubscribe to it if we leave this component. So we don't need to do anything more here. So we can also delete this ng on init because we don't need it. So this component gets very clear now. And then the second thing is, if our child component emits a value for pagination, so an event, then we want to execute this function here. And here we want just to say this block entries is not anymore here to index all first page 10, but we want to say now it is block service.index all. And now we go for event.pageindex, so what page we want to have. And we go for the page size. Because here in our function we want to have the page and the limit, so how many items should be displayed. Yes. So if we go now to our front end, this should work, I think. So we see here, we are on home. If we go to the next page, before it was test title 7. Now we have the next page and the next page, so this works fine. What we can do now is, we have at the moment here our heading, all block entries, in our child component. We can also move this to our home component and just move it to above it. Then we can make it a little bit nicer looking. And then we see we have it here. Navigate to everything. And now we have done all the things that we need to implement this now also for our user profile page. So for example, we're here on our user profile page. Now I want to display also all the block entries made by this user here. So we just have to add this child component, like in home component, to our profile component, and add some logic for pagination and everything into our component. So at first we need to add something to our service, because now we have just find one, index all, post a new block entry and upload header image. So we need something like index by user, like in our backend. And here we can just have a quick look in our Postman request. So we have here our request get block entries by user with query parameters. So this here is our route that we go against. So API block entries, then user, and then the ID of the user that we want to have the block entries. And then we can also specify page or the page size. So we can delete this. And then it returns the first 10 items for this user here. And we see we have total items from this user for 23. Or if we go against all block entries, then we should see that there are 25, because it mostly with this one specific user. So if we go against 7, then we get this block entries from this user paginated, user 7. And here, so we can now make this function here, and we can say index by user. And here we need some inputs like user ID number. We also want to have like here page and limit. And then we want to return an observable, and this is also the block entries pageable. So we make the same as here. We say we want to have parameters in our route. So this stuff here, this is, parameter would be page 1. You see it here, it adds here to the params. And then we can just say return this.http.get. Then we make it BlogEntries pageable type. And then we go against our /API/BlogEntries/user. Then we add our user ID, convert it to a string, and then we add the params that we made here. And this should be all for this. So now we have our function, our service that we need for our profile component. So we can go to our user profile component, and then we add here our blog entries. So let's say we have here app all blog entries, and this value here, app all blog entries, this is the thing that you see here. So this is our selector. With this we can add this as a component to other components. So then, as before, we have our input blog entries, and then we have our output paginate, and now we have to add all this stuff in our component. So like before, then we want to, if the user hits paginate in the child component, we want to make the event here. So now let's do the stuff. And also refactor this here a bit, because this is some kind of a mess. So the first thing that we could do is we could set the user is from type observable user. And here we could say this.activated route.params.subscribe.pipe. Then we make a switch map, so we env the current observable and get the params from the routes. And here we can just say we have our user ID, and then we return this.userService.find1. We insert our user ID, and this could just be it. Here. And then we can, in our component, for example, go here against user, subscribe to this value with our async pipe, and let's say this is then the value user, so we can just let it the same, don't have to refactor anything more. So we can remove this user here, and we can also remove this stuff here completely. And we can also, I think, remove this ng on init, because we don't even need it, and the same goes for ng on destroy, because everything here handles our async pipe. We can also remove this subscription, and then we can make our blog entries. And these are also from type observable, blog entries pageable, and this is our blog service, so we have to add this to our constructor. And then we say blog service dot index by user that we just made. Or let's say we want to refactor this here a bit, because here we set our user ID here, and then we work with it, and we would also need this here, and so on. So what I would like to do is we say we have our user ID, private, also observable, and let's say type number, and then we go for activated route.params. We pipe it and map it, so we take an observable in and take an observable out. Go for params, and then we say just parse int, so this is also then observable. And go for the ID as before, and then we can also refactor this here, and we can just pipe this.userid and make the switch map, but now not for params, but here we also already get the user ID, so we user ID from type number, so we don't need this here anymore, and we can just insert here user ID, and we can also here we have the return if we have these squared brackets, I think, and if we remove this and make it a one-liner, then we don't need the return and this brackets. And since we are using here our async pipe in our HTML, our view, we don't even need to subscribe here. So we can now make the same thing here, because to index all our blog entries we also need the user ID. So we say user ID, we pipe it, then we make a switch map to get the value user ID, which is from type number, and then we just go against our blog service, we go against our index by user function, and here we insert our user ID, the first page, and 10 entries. So you see user ID, page number 1, and limit to 10 blog entries. And now we have it very clean here. And then we will just, we can insert the blog entries here. Blog entries. We make it async. And now we need the onPaginate change function here. And here we also get an event. This is our page event from our child component. And here we also want to do it at here, like this here. We want to return our user ID dot pipe, and then we can just tab. We have our user ID from type number, and then we set our blog entries here. Blog entries is here set to the index by user, first page, and the limit by 10 and the user ID. But now we want to make it new and say this is now against blog service dot index by user, also our user ID, and then our event dot page index and our event dot page size. And we have to import this tab here. Here, and then this should work. So, or let's have a quick look. So if we are on home, we have here all our blog entries. We can paginate through them. We can go to our user, and we get displayed nothing. Let's see. See an error in our front end. Let's close all. Block entire, so I made a little mistake, so we want again go against block entries. And now you see they are displayed here and they are going out of the card. So we see we have here our CSS card height 300 pixels. So we remove this and then this should all be here inside. And now we can go for the next page. It's not working because, let's have a quick look. We are in our user profile component, so we paginate. So we have to subscribe to this, so the observable gets hot, because here we are not having our async here, so we are just doing async for the block entries here, but not here. And so you see now we can also paginate through it. And we could make like here a little heading, let's say we are in our user profile and we just make it here in H2 and say block entries of user.username. Here I think this should be all, so we have done all the displaying block entries for our homepage and for our user profile page, and we have used the input-output so that we don't have to code everything twice. So let's see if everything here is proper formatted. Let's move this. So, and if we can navigate through this here, to this here, and if we are on our user component, let's see why we can't do this. So you see now he wants to go against users block entries 16, but it should go against block entry 17 or 16, whatever. So we have to do a bit stuff more here. So in our all block entries component at the moment, we do this here, we add to our router link, we go one up and then block entries, block entry ID. But we can't do this anymore because we are doing this here from two things. So we want then to execute a click, and we can just say, let me think about it. Navigate, of course. So we want to navigate. And we want to have our block entry dot ID with it. So then we go into our component and make a new navigate function. And here we want to get the ID of the user where we want to navigate to. And then we can just say this.router.navigate by URL. And for this to work, we need in our constructor the router from Angular, and then we just go to block entries and add the ID. So let's see, we can navigate on our homepage, yes, to our block entry, and we can also go to our user and navigate to a block entry. Here, so we can now close everything, so we can just check against our story here. So we have all block entries have an input, and we have an output for paginating. And we use it as child component for user profile and the home component. And we have done also some refactoring to make everything cleaner and less code. And now we can move this to done. And here we can now also end our server. Don't let you confused by this here. This is just because I uploaded some images that are not here anymore. Here. And we can stop everything, and then we can just say git add -upper-A, and then we want to have a commit message. Let's say V-28 added input and output to all profiles component. So we use it as a directive for a home component and user profile component. And then we can just say git-flow feature finish, and this will merge our feature back into our develop branch. So you can see now we have merged our feature 28 back into our develop branch, and then we push our develop branch up to our remote repository to GitLab